Nobody forgets the truth of who they are. They just get better at lying to themselves.
Damn. Now that's very contradictory to a lot of the
Mm.
narrative of, oh, I forgot who I am. I don't know who I am. Like what my authenticity is. What's my intuition saying? So you're saying we just get better at lying to ourselves. Say more.
And, I don't know that it's conscious lying to ourselves, but I think there's a narrative we tell ourselves about why this is just what I have to do to be responsible, or this is what it is to be an adult, or what I desire for my life isn't realistic. I think there's a whole bunch of ways we talk ourselves into the lie, but there's some part of us that always knows and is being pulled back in the direction of the truth of what I believe our souls know we came into this life to embody and do with our one wild and precious life.
So what does that have to do with the lies? Where do the lies come in, and how do we get good at lying to ourselves? What does that look like? I guess I should say.
Well, I mean, I think the way that I see it show up probably most prevalently in my life and the work that I do is I'm primarily a couples therapist. So I think there's a lot of ways that we've been programmed to think about love and relationships and ourselves in the context of those dynamics, but also I think that was certainly true for me. I think I was married for almost 12 years to an incredible, beautiful soul who, in so many ways, there was nothing, quote, wrong with our relationship. There was no reason that I would leave that relationship or we would decide that that relationship needed to change form, except that on some level, both of us knew like this isn't really the truth, but it was comfortable and it was safe and it was a really pretty picture, all of the things that maybe societally we've been programmed to believe you should want for yourself. And I just felt so hungry to have something more and to walk a different path than the path that I was walking. And I see it so often in certainly the couples that I sit with, but the individuals as well. There's a way that we're all grappling with the things that we know that we need to do to fit in with societal templates a lot of times of, you know, what we feel like we want belonging, but it's not actual belonging because some part of us believes that if you really saw me fully, if I left it all out there, that maybe I would be rejected or I would be exiled from the community. And so a lot of times we spend, especially I think in the first part of our lives, really sort of making our truths a little bit smaller, making ourselves a little bit more digestible to the cultural paradigms. And then we do that until it's just not sustainable anymore.
What was that point for you when it wasn't sustainable anymore?
Good question. I think it's interesting. I was in that marriage for 9 years. And I think I always had like a lot of angst. I think, the way that people talk about attachment styles now is, and I'm sure you understand this, it's sort of a way that we've pathologized aspects of our human experience and it can sort of be like they're very fixed states. And so I don't love that about them. But in our relationship dynamic, I would have been the more avoidant, energetic between the two of us. And so there were always ways that he was looking for more connection and more intimacy and attempting to make plans for our future. And I was always resistant. I was always sort of, you're trying to cage me and box me and make me do things I don't want to do. I was like an angsty teenager for so much of that relationship dynamic. And then, I had a little boy, honestly, and so much of my life and our dynamic started to shift for me because I think when I had a child, and I don't know that this is the case for everyone, but it was certainly the case for me, I started to, well, certainly some of that teenage angst started to settle, and I started to really think about the woman that I wanted to be and that I wanted him to experience me as. And just the things I wanted to teach him about life and who he gets to be in this lifetime. And there was a point when I honestly thought, like, if he were in a relationship with a woman like me, that would break my heart. And I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be that person that I wouldn't want my son to be with. And I thought about the way that I was with his father and the way I showed up a lot of times with a lot of entitlement and a lack of like deep reverence for his father. And I didn't want my child to see that. And so I thought, we've got to start having some honest conversations about why I feel so angsty and resentful all the time because he was just a really beautiful soul attempting to love me. And for for whatever reason, that just wasn't in alignment with truth for me.
And that was the angsty feeling, is ultimately what was underneath that, the truth underneath that.
Yeah, which, and I always say, like, I don't really believe in mistakes. I think it's all the curriculum that our souls require to understand what we're meant to develop through and understand up to this point. So I think our relationship dynamic was perfect in terms of where I was developmentally. When I was young, it was a really safe container that allowed me to do some of the things that I might not have been really safe doing. And, I needed that safety, I guess, in the beginning. And it felt really good to have that. And then there was a way as I continued to develop, it felt a little bit stifling. And now I can see that it's always the truth that, Glennon Doyle has this line in her book where she says there's no such thing as one-way liberation. And I remember reading that and being like, oof, God, thank you for that. Because what I've seen so clearly since our relationship dynamic changed form, and I don't say ended because, he's still one of my best friends, but also I think when we're connected to people, we're always in connection. Like we've been impacted by that relationship. But as our relationship changed form, there were all these ways that he was liberated too. There were ways that he was making the truth of who he was smaller and attempting to hustle for my acceptance and be who he thought he needed to be a good man for me. And he's been so liberated in coming into deeper layers of his authentic self. And it's been really beautiful to witness that.
That's amazing. So you wrote the book Sovereign Love. Got it right here.
Thank you.
And I mean, I just first off love the title because I think a lot of people lose their sovereignty in a relationship.
Mm,
They lose that sense of self. We self abandon and go into the relationship to appease or shut down a part of ourselves to make it work
yeah.
because we want it so bad or whatever the reason. I would love to hear from you because I know you're also a marriage and family therapist and you've done a lot of this work yourself, obviously.
Mm.
What have you seen from the culture at large as to why we lose our sense of power when it comes to relationship and why that's so present in our culture?
Yeah. It's an interesting time. I think there's a lot that's shifting collectively around the ways that we've been relating. And it's interesting because before I became a marriage and family therapist, I worked in addiction recovery. And so I used to just be in the realm of how we like fight to find comfort in our skin and are able to stay in spaces of overwhelm or nervous system overwhelm and dysregulation and all of those things, right? And so um, I started to understand what it is to cultivate tools to be able to stay in our skin. And I was also a yoga teacher at the same time that I was doing that work. So I had sort of this a lot of Eastern philosophy and spiritual traditions that I was really obsessed with doing deep dives into and exploring. And then I was also in the space of like, and what does it mean to be in this body in this lifetime, right? So I was sort of exploring those dualities of the soul space along with the ego space and how we sort of integrate those two things. And then when I started working, certainly with individuals, but mostly with couples, there was a way that I was like watching the dynamics playing out. And I was like, oh God, so much of this feels so similar to what happens in our relationships with a substance or with something that we are really struggling to feel like we can be in our, like, okay in our skin without. And we're doing that with people. And so it would look like, one of my clients would be unbelievably anxious, flooded with overwhelm, unable to stay present in her skin until she got the text message from the guy. And then, oh, okay, now I'm okay again. Right. And I was like, what's fascinating though is it still becomes a real outsourcing of our power. And if I need anything outside of me to be okay in my skin, that thing holds a tremendous amount of power. And I won't actually show up as an authentic self. And ultimately, I won't be the self that I have the potential to be if I need this person or this thing in order to feel like I'll be okay. Now, that's tough because a little bit different than like substances. We can't just take away relationships. Like we're going to need to be in relationships with people. And so I just started to get really curious around like, what does that look like to be able to stay with myself and be in my body and in my skin while attempting to relate to others from a more interdependent place versus that space of like codependency where I'm okay if we're okay, right? Um, and so I just started to do like a deep dive, like the history of relationships, the history of like a patriarchal structure, how that has impacted all of us, regardless of gender, how it's impacted the way that we're socializing with one another, we're socialized to be in terms of gender. And what's beautiful about the time we're living in, and I believe we all chose to be alive for this shift in consciousness, is that it's really changing and we're really starting to, well, some things are changing and some things we're coming back to, I believe, some universal truths about what are really beautiful about relationship dynamics and how we relate to one another. And so in the book, I get into a lot of that dance, right? Around like there are some things that we are defining like beyond roles and like this is the gender role of who I need to be in this relationship dynamic. Like, what do we want this to be? What do we want this to look like? Right. But then there's also some truths that are challenging to deny and that maybe we shouldn't. Like, for instance, I think, when my marriage ended and I started dating again, there were ways that I felt dormant energy of my feminine come to life in certain energy with men that I would be like, this is fascinating how much I hadn't even realized how hungry I was to not be so in my masculine. And especially, in motherhood, something that I've realized it's actually like a really masculine role. It's very like task and delegate and contain and keep safe. And so you're very much, especially in our culture as women, in your masculine a lot of times when you're a mama. And all of a sudden like not being in that energy and being seen as a woman and sort of being in that space of like, oh, I can soften and maybe surrender a little bit. Like I was blown away by how good that felt and how some of those things like we're not supposed to speak to. It's like politically incorrect to say that, but it was the truth of what I was feeling. And I was like, I cannot be the only woman who feels this way, right? So I just started to get really curious about all of these energetics that go on between all of us, men, women, like however we identify in terms of gender and all of those variables, but how we attempt to negotiate that to love one another well.
Yeah, that's beautiful in that dance, especially the masculine and feminine. You
Mm.
mentioned that a lot in your book as well, towards the sovereignty part. Could you speak a little bit more about that and how those energies interplay into our own sovereignty within a relationship?
Yeah, love to. I think so. I'll start. I mean, I feel like if people that would listen to your podcast probably have a little bit from watching your content of, conceptualization of the masculine and feminine energetics. But just in case someone's listening that doesn't, so I think in terms of like clinical psychology, Carl Jung was sort of, you know, I don't even know if I would say the first because these are like ancient wisdom and teachings, but Carl Jung, in terms of psychology, was the first to really speak to all of us having both masculine and feminine traits and qualities within us. He sort of spoke to the anima as the feminine aspects of someone who identifies as male and the animus as the masculine qualities in someone who identifies as female. Now, we understand these energetics to be a lot more nuanced than maybe Carl Jung spoke to them now. But the larger truth is that all of us have both masculine and feminine energy within. And so what ends up happening is a lot of times, based on the way that we're socialized or based on what's happening with us in any given moment in our relationship dynamics, we will feel like it's another person's role to sort of complete what we are, like, sort of our underdeveloped function or the thing that's a little bit harder for me. So if I really live in my masculine, I might be more attracted to a person who shows up more in their feminine because there's something about like the magnetic pull of polarity. But if I am hungry to live more in my core feminine most of the time, some part of me will feel that angst. And it's some of what I can understand now was happening in my previous relationship dynamic is that I was really raised to be a very like, don't trust a man, don't need a man, don't depend on a man woman. And so much of that, like living in sort of that wounded masculine armor that I was conditioned to live in made it really difficult for me first to embrace the aspects of my own essence, but also to be able to surrender into the trust of partnership in the way that I believe we have to if we're going to really love one another. And so if we understand that we will inevitably create polarity in our dynamics, and a lot of it will just feel so good in the way that we're talking about, it's really about identifying, well, two things. First, understanding that it's a lot of our own work to integrate these polarities within ourselves and really be in relationship with both. So, how do I go inward and get in touch with the presence of my own sacred feminine energetic? And then from there, how do I move into the space of inspired action in life, in the world, in my mission? And what does that look like for me? So I'm not really looking for someone else to complete me. However, once I've done some of that integrative work for myself, then I'm really able to, I find, attract something that feels really aligned in terms of love and partnership, because I'm vibrating at a level that is maybe different from if I was looking for someone to complete those energetics for me. And so it starts to become a really beautiful dance of polarity with the person that you're in relationship with. And especially if we can be conscious of our energy, then we can sort of check in and be like, oof, I'm really in my wounded masculine right now. So I probably need to take responsibility for bringing myself into some healthy feminine energy and being a little bit more playful and a little bit more trusting in life, putting down some of my need to control. And similarly, if I'm in my wounded feminine energy, then it really becomes my responsibility to be some of that self-containing energy. And how do I tap into my tools to help me, like, be rooted in the larger beliefs in life? And how can I focus on myself and what I need to do for myself versus outsourcing that to another person? Mm.
I kind of want to switch gears a little bit and go into your practice, if you're open to sharing, maybe
Sure.
some commonalities and some things that come up with couples, and how maybe, I guess what I'm asking is like common blind spots that
Mm.
couples have.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think when I first met you, I was telling you about a video that I saw a couple weeks ago that you posted, and I don't remember how you were saying it, but it was something in the realm of sisters. Like, if you want your man to lead, it becomes really important that you trust in his leadership. And I remember being like, oh, God, he's so right on with that. Because, and listen, this is without one, one twinge of righteousness, because been there, sisters. And there is a way that I think we as women are often asking for leadership from our partners if we're in partnership with a man, but actually, regardless of what it looks like, but certainly with men. And then just really being unwilling to release some of that control and trust in their leadership. And that it's like, if it's not done the way that I would do it, it's not done right. And so I think that's, I think in terms of like the most common thing that comes up, well, two things come up most commonly with couples that I work with. One is certainly like mismatched desire in terms of like physical intimacy. So that's a huge component. And I have some thoughts on why in terms of masculine and feminine energetics. But the second one is always like the emotional labor and how much like I'm doing around the house and I'm carrying the weight of all the things. And a lot of times what that ends up looking like is the man in the relationship dynamic will be like, amazing, I'm going to take this over, let me do this thing, right? And then when he attempts to be supportive of his partner and gets in there and does the thing, like the list of criticism is really long, and then it really just like shuts him down. He's like, well, I'm just, I'm not even going to try, because whatever I do, it's wrong. And, I think what I came to understand is there's like these core pain points that men and women are defending against. And for women, it's the abandonment wound. Like, we're like really defending against being abandoned. And for men, it's really like defending against shame. And there's so much about how we as women have been socialized to be in this like really hyper masculine state of control and fix that's like penetrative presence. So I'm like right there fixed on what he's not doing right. And it really elicits that shame wound in men. And so it's like, if I'm going to be shamed, then I'm not going to try. And it's not even like a conscious thought. It's just like, whatever you want from me, like the phrase happy wife, happy life is like nails on a chalkboard for me. I'm like, ah. But it's a lot of what I feel like ends up, just being the solution to like, I just don't want to be criticized. I just don't want to like be beat down for doing it wrong. So I'm not even going to try to take that initiative. And then the woman in the dynamic's like, well, I need you to take some initiative and some leadership. And it's like, well, but when he does, how do you meet that?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I want to go back to what you mentioned about the mixed match of sexual desires. What are your thoughts on that? I'd honestly love to know.
Yeah, well, it's tough, right? Because what I think and what I really shift in terms of the way that I talk to couples about desire and like keeping the eros and the life force and all of those things alive in our relationship dynamics is we have to think about like what first cultivates a sense of attraction. And a lot of times it's the mystery, the unknown, that you're this erotic other, right? That I'm like drawn like, to have someone is to love, but to desire someone is to want, to long for. And so there's a lot of ways that the ways that we've cultivated relationships and these romantic dynamics are sort of almost enmeshed. Like, I know everything about you. Like, I don't know where you end and I begin, and vice versa. I can't tell you how often couples are like, we just like can finish each other's sentences. And that's great for a lot of safety and maybe attachment, but it's not really great for eros and life force and desiring one another. And, there's ways that I talk about in the book that the stability, the attachment, the containment is the masculine, and that's what our society has put, maybe from a wounded space, a lot of emphasis on. But the eros, the life force, the sensuality, the unknown space of creation is our feminine, and we haven't put as much emphasis on that and why that's necessary. And, in clinical psychology, there's such a like emphasis on like, just keep the structure intact, just keep everybody in the marriage. But it's like, and go on a date night every once in a while, and that should be enough. And I'm like, it's not enough. Nobody's having sex. Like, we should care, because the thing about whatever aspect of these, parts of ourselves that we suppress, like they will come to the surface. And so this is why, inevitably, if we've been suppressing our need for life force and eros, I promise life will deliver a way that it's going to come back up to the surface. And a lot of times, what that looks like is infidelity, or, something happens where I lose someone and I just like get struck with this, like, oh my God, like, this is my life. What am I doing? I can't just be safe. I say in the book a lot of times, like, ships are safe in harbors, but that's not what ships were built for. And that's a little bit like our relationship dynamics. Like, I believe that there's so much beautiful energy in the safety of a long-term relationship. But if it's just about the safety, I think that's really missing an element of what we came into these lives to do.
So where does that element interplay then, right? Obviously, if like safe, we want a safe relationship, but we also want a passionate and erotic relationship. And so, where's the
What's the
mingling of
solution?
those two, and what does that actually look like? Because, um, yeah, I totally hear you. Like from the collective, there is this, we're starving for safety in a lot of ways. And so, like, clinging to it and creating it and doubling down. And like that seems to be a lot of the narrative from a lot of coaches and therapists of that. And then, that does have a shadow to it, which is, like you said, the interdependence and the
Mm,
knowing everything about your partner. And the normalcy that can create, that they can lead to this feeling of something's missing,
mm.
which I think is what we're touching on. How does, and I have my thoughts on this, but I'm curious about you, like how does a couple create that sense of safety and have the passion and mystery and arrows still alive? What does that begin to look like?
Yeah. I'm like, well, I definitely want to hear your thoughts. Yes, I'm like, what do you think? And I think that this is a lot of times the collaborative energy of like, yeah, like, what does that look like for you? Because I'm sure there are ways that I will think about it that, are like, yes, this is my conceptualization of this. And then you'll tell me something and I'll be like, oh my God, yes, that's so helpful. And I hadn't thought of that. And I think to me that speaks to we need more, like more collaboration, more community. I think these nuclear family structures of like we are meant to be everything to one another has really been to our detriment. I think in collectivist societies and indigenous cultures, there's ways that they are, just providing all of things that all of us need, but we're not looking for one person to do and be that. And from what I see, one person just never has the capacity to be all of those things for us. And, I think women are a lot of times socialized to do that a lot more, to like really, lean on intimacy with their girlfriends. But, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. I see a lot of times with my brothers that they haven't been socialized to do that as much later in life, right? Like maybe when they're younger sometimes, but once they get married and, settle down or whatever we're calling it, then it sort of becomes like I don't have those levels of intimacy with not even just my brothers, but just like with people anymore. And so it's like this one relationship dynamic is meant to fill all those roles, and it's just not sustainable.
Yeah, I see that completely. I see men at large. I mean, the attack on testosterone and just men's testosterone levels
Mhm.
says a lot.
Yeah.
So we can look at that like physically and health wise, that's at an all time low, and it's definitely a pandemic if we want to call it that, and
Mm.
that's going to affect a lot on how he shows up or doesn't show up. And so I always go there first. But then, yeah, the sense of adventure gets stifled, the sense of brotherhood gets stifled, the sense of his own freedom might get suffocated from the demands and the responsibilities and the roles that he plays. I mean, part of
Mm.
what I have taught in one of my master classes recently was like men need fuck off time where they can put their fucking responsibilities on hold and go be a little kid
Yeah.
or like, go to the gun range, or whether that's like doing something in a healthy space in a healthy way, obviously with agreements, but like just let it go for a second. And that enlivens the masculine spirit to be able to, and almost replenishes it to be able to show up more in all of his life, and especially for the relationship.
Mm.
And so I think, to answer the what's needed, I love the collaborative conversations. I think are huge for this piece, which, I'm happy that we're here talking about this now for everybody listening. My perspective on the safety erotic dance is an overarching, like fundamental heart-centered level of safety of like,
Mm.
I'm here, I'm committed, I don't want to hurt you, like those type of pillars in a relationship. And I'd love to go there next, of setting up a structure and a foundation of like, this is the arena and this is the space that we're in this container.
Yeah.
And then there's spontaneity, variety, and mystery, which is the
Mm.
erotic formula. And I think that is where, yeah, can you shake the shit up? Like, can you do something that's a little bit different? Like, if
Mm.
keep them on their toes. Like, if you get too in your routine, it's gonna dull things out, right? And I'm guilty of that even as a man. So how can you spice it up? How can you be a little bit of like, I can't quite put my finger on it, like
Mm.
I can't quite make out type of energy,
Yeah.
and and being playful in that. And then also I think like logistically and structurally, for those who are more heady right now, like more time apart,
Yes.
honestly, like
Absolutely.
like having some alone time and letting that be healthy in the dynamic, and not necessarily always having to do everything together, it says a lot. And again, every couple's different, so some couples have too much alone time and they need a little bit more come together, right, and vice versa. So it's
Yeah.
hard to throw out blanket statements like that, but that's my 2 cents on that conversation.
What I love so much about what you said is there's a way that like there's a containment in like I'm here, you're safe, I'm not going anywhere, and then can we allow for the aliveness? Can we allow for the freedom to be a self, right? And that to me is the sovereignty piece that, I think God, there's like a way that I started to realize like there's like I don't think our society is actually suffering from like too much masculinity as much as I talk about like wounded masculine paradigms. Like, I think we actually need more masculinity in our society. And it's like the domestication of men. And like, I think it starts so early. And I think I couldn't see some of this until my little boy was in school, and like the way that they attempt to pathologize what it is to be a boy, right? Like he's Aries. So he's like all fire. Like, they'd be like, he just can't sit still. And I'd be like, he's a little boy. Like, no, he's not meant to. He like needs to
Yeah.
like run around and like, like, I don't know, all the things. Like, he's just so much fire. But that we make those things something that need to be contained and wrong. And they're like the beautiful elements of the masculine energy. And I think that that's true in all of us, but certainly I think there's a way that we need to celebrate and make more space for that in men. And I think that, I don't know, I don't know if you experience that, but there's just such a desire to have certainty that even me saying something like that, I promise you, like if I were to say that in a post, I would get so much pushback from my sisters, like very much like it's activating to say, like, we really need to think about the way that we're stifling masculinity and how that's impacting men. And there is some part of us as women who are attracted to men who are so unbelievably hungry for that warrior energy, for that. I mean, it's the same reason we're not attracted to nice guys, right? Or like that sort of like narrative. It's the same reason that a, franchise like 50 Shades of Grey was like the number one seller for all those years. It's because some part of us as women is so unbelievably hungry for that strong, masculine, unapologetic self that I think society, and that to me is where patriarchy has been damaging to men. It's like not letting men be in the fullness of their essence in a way that we celebrate and recognize the need for.
Yeah, most definitely. As being a man, there's been my own thing to overcome. And
Mm,
having been a former like nice guy, people pleaser, codependent, all of that, and
mm,
reclaiming that wild side of me and recognizing the domestication that's happened because I was ADD, ADHD, super loud, super big,
mm,
and full of energy, and then extremely heavily medicated, constantly told to shut up, constantly
mm.
told that I was too much. You know what I mean? Like, and
Ugh,
then I look at what my authentic expression wants to do today and what has equated to beauty in my life or abundance in my life. And I'm like, it's the same thing. In the ways that I feel more free and that
mm,
I have made more money that I have made, the friendships that I've made, all of it came from my expression that back then when I was a little boy was told was too much and it was medicated for and told to shut up about. I just find that interesting. It's like this that, and then yet that's the thing that we're starving for, as you said, is the society.
it actually makes my blood boil. Like I'm having like a visceral reaction as I hear that because I do see that that is what we do to children every day and are still doing to children every day. And I was so proud of my kid's dad because he was like, hell no, when
Yeah.
we started going down that conversation of like, maybe this is something that needs to be like contained in some way. And he was like, no, his energy is beautiful. And I think we're starting to understand that. But like when you were a little boy, parents didn't understand. They were just sort of listening to the external authority and really suppressing what is so beautiful in our children. And so I love hearing that you've reclaimed that. And I think that that is, where we are is really shifting collectively from like some external authority knows what is best to like, how do I go inside and really get clear on what life and aliveness and truth and beauty feels like for me and trust in that. And I think, that as way showers are doing that and saying like, no, it's absolutely possible to thrive as your authentic self. And it's like you're giving permission for everyone else to do the same. So thank you for that,
Thank
Kevin.
you. I
And
appreciate it.
yeah, it's beautiful.
Circling back one last time, sovereign love,
Mm,
that expression when it comes to relationship, because I think there's a lot of people, and myself included, that have worked on that expression in life and personal development.
mhm.
And just as there's no singular liberation, when it comes to expression and sovereignty, how does and how have you seen couples create that sense of expression together and that
Yeah.
sense of sovereignty together? What are
Mm.
some ingredients to that? What could you talk about?
Yeah. Well, some of it you touched on a little bit when
Mm,
you were talking about how to keep some of that aliveness there. I really encourage couples to find that balance of, to me, the way that I define love today is your soul is safe with me, period, right? Like I'm here. You're safe to be that full expression of yourself with me. And even if that means that we are not together in this relationship container. I want your soul to experience and be all of the things that you came into this life to be. That is me loving you. And I really encourage couples to treat their partner as if your partner does not belong to you. And it's sort of a little bit of a, way that we can play with our mind around it. And it's like, how would you treat this person if they weren't, quote, yours, if you didn't know that they'd be here tomorrow? Like, if you weren't taking that for granted, it's some of what you were saying about creating the nuance. Like, I would probably plan a date. I would probably tell him how much I'm grateful for the details of the things that he does and how much I trust and respect in him. I would probably really take a breath to see her and look at her and what she's wearing and just be in awe of her radiance. But those are things that we can really lose track of when we believe that this is, quote, my person, my partner, right? And so if it's like, no, they're never yours, it's an illusion that we ever have ownership of another person. I think it gives us an opportunity to just hold this relationship dynamic as something that I'm not promised, but that I hold with a lot more reverence than I might otherwise. And yes, we do need that safety that you were talking about, but the safety is like, I'm gonna love you. I'm here, present seeing you, but no, you're not mine. You don't belong to me ever.
And how does that interplay with safety?
You're like, and does that make people feel safe
I'm
today?
just
Because
hearing I'm
I can
hearing
hear
what
some
other
people
people are
now, right?
thinking. Yep.
Yeah. And to me, Kevin, this is a little bit of like the rise of the feminine energetic in us collectively, that we're sort of dispelling the
Hmm.
illusion that we get to have certainty, right? It would have never occurred to me that my 12-year marriage would have ended. Like I thought we were, together in that container forever, and we weren't. And it's okay. I think there's a lot of things that we believe that we need to have certainty around. And listen, I'm not saying like have marriages or sacred unions, or like I'm here for it. I love it. I love love. That's beautiful. But it's a little bit of like, how do I hold this within me, that there's a level of certainty around life in general that I don't get to have. That is what it is to me to be in that sacred dance with divinity, and that like we came here to be in the space of aliveness, and the certainty that we've felt like we have is always an illusion, always has been an illusion. But what we can be certain of is the responsibility I want to take for the way I show up in this dynamic. That's the 100% I can take. I can't control another person. And I think a lot of times what keeps us in the space of suffering when things change, or when the certainty that I thought was there is no longer there, is like, you promised, you made that, like, we signed a contract. This is a marriage contract, right? And it's like, and your soul is safe with me. So if this is not what is in alignment with your soul, and we are meant to allow this to change form, I love you. And so I don't want to hold you in something that is no longer true. And yes, I'm aware it's like a radically different way of holding it. But I do believe that, and especially as we get further into the Aquarian age, where things are going to be less about structure and more about innovation and expansion and all of these different energetics, that people are going to come into relationships more when they're justified and less because they are like incomplete. And I do think we're going to shift more into community, because we're going to have to, for our, like, the survival of our species. We're going to have to come back together and learn how to love one another again. But I think in that, when it is justified for me to be in partnership with someone, that is when we will come together in union. But not because I'm just like waiting for the one to come complete me, because we were never incomplete.
Thank you
Mm.
so much for being on the show
Oh my gosh,
and for
such an
sharing
honor.
your heart, your wisdom. For everybody tuning in, again, she has wrote Sovereign Love. Got it here for me for watching on YouTube. Where can
Oh,
people get the book, find out more about you and your work?
thanks, Kevin. So Dene Logan on all of the different socials, and my website's denelogan.com. And yeah, just thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the world. I find it so inspiring and beautiful, and I appreciate getting to sit down with you.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Oh, thank you.